Welcome back to Northern Tales, where silence is broken and every woman's voice finds its way back to her own voice. Let's continue Zubaida's story. The journey from Mani to Abuja felt longer than any journey Zubaida had ever taken in her life. She sat quietly in the back seat beside Alhaji Kabir, wiping tears intermittently. They didn't speak much during the journey. She watched as the dusty roads of the village slowly disappeared behind them. The further they traveled, the wider the roads became. The houses changed too. Mud compounds disappeared and were replaced by tall fences, painted gates, and buildings that looked too polished to be real. By the time they entered Abuja properly, Zubaida felt small. Everything looked different from the world she knew. Cars moved fast and silently beside them. Street lights stood in perfect rows. People walked confidently, carrying big phones. She pressed her face lightly against the window, trying not to stare too openly. Then finally, the car turned into a quiet estate lined with massive houses, hidden behind high walls and armed security gates. When the driver stopped before Alhaji Kabir's mansion, Zubaida forgot to breathe for a moment. The house looked like something from television. 3 floors, cream-colored walls, and tall glass windows. Balconies wrapped with shining metal rails. 2 black jeeps parked neatly outside. Flower gardens trimmed perfectly. Even the compound tiles were shining. A fountain stood near the entrance, water dancing softly under golden lights. For a second, 12-year-old Zubaida remembered the old well in Mani, the long queues at the borehole, and suddenly she became painfully aware of her small travel bag and faded sandals. Before she could fully gather herself, the front doors opened. Her cousins appeared first, the same familiar faces. Only now they looked even more polished than before. The girls wore matching expensive lounge clothes while holding tablets in their hands. One of the boys glanced at Zubaida briefly before smirking. So, if she's finally here. Another muttered loudly enough for her to hear. She actually brought that back. The girls laughed softly. Then Hajia Kilishi appeared behind them, beautiful as always, elegant wrapper, perfect makeup, gold jewelry shining under the lights. The moment she saw Zubaida, her face transformed instantly into warm kindness. "My daughter," she exclaimed dramatically. Before Zubaida could react, Kilishi pulled her into a light embrace for everyone to see. "Welcome to Abuja." Alhaji Kabir smiled proudly beside them. "You see," he told Zubaida warmly, "your aunt has been excited for your arrival." Kilishi nodded sweetly. "Of course, she's our daughter now." Zubaida forced a smile, but something about the woman's eyes felt cold, very cold. Inside the mansion felt even bigger. The floors shined like mirrors. Huge chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Cold air from the air conditioners wrapped around Zubaida's skin so strangely she almost shivered. The staircase curved upward like something inside a hotel. Framed family portraits covered the walls. Everywhere smelled clean and expensive. One of the maids carried Zubaida's small bag upstairs. And immediately the cousins began. "Don't touch anything. This side is the family sitting room. Wash your feet properly before entering." One of the girls stared openly at Zubaida's clothes. "Did you only bring village gowns?" Again, soft laughter. Zubaida lowered her eyes and remained silent. She had promised her mother she would behave well. The only person nice to her among the cousins is Saudat, the third child of the family. She was 9, but Saudat wasn't like other children. They said she did not cry for 2 days after birth. and she was born before her time. Nobody knew she would survive. So although she looked normal outward, Zubaida have had elders in the village say her brain does not work well. So she is overly friendly with everybody. And although she talks clearly, you can hardly make sense of what she was saying. So immediately she saw Zubaida, she sat with her in her room and was telling different stories about her special school and friends without completing a single story. Zubaida listened and laughed for the first time since she left Mani. That evening, Alhaji Kabir stayed close to her almost constantly. He asked about her journey, asked whether she was hungry, told everybody she will soon begin school in Abuja. You must study hard, he said openly and proudly during dinner. Your father wanted greatness for you. Whenever Kabir spoke that way, Kilishi smiled supportively. Yes, of course, she agreed gently. She's intelligent. The children behaved carefully whenever their father was present. Polite, controlled, almost normal. For a brief moment, Zubaida wondered if maybe her mother's fears had been exaggerated. Maybe living here would not be so terrible after all. But late that night, everything changed. After dinner, Kabir left briefly for an important political meeting. The moment his car exited the compound, the atmosphere inside the house shifted completely. It happened so fast, it frightened Zubaida. The smiles disappeared. The warmth vanished. Even the servants suddenly became tense. One of the cousins snatched the television remote from her immediately. Who told you to sit there? Another pointed towards a smaller chair near the corner. That place is for visitors. Before Zubaida could move properly, Hajia Kilishi's voice cut through the room sharply. Come here. The tone alone made Zubaida's stomach tighten. Kilishi led her quietly upstairs into a private room and closed the door behind them. For several seconds, she simply stared at Zubaida. Then slowly, the smile disappeared from her face entirely. What exactly did your mothers tell you before sending you here? She asked coldly. Zubaida blinked nervously. They said I should behave well. Kilishi laughed. A cruel laugh. Behave well, she repeated mockingly. Listen to me carefully, village girl. The words hit Zubaida immediately. I did not bring you here because I suddenly love your father's children. She stepped closer. You are here to help in this house. Zubaida froze. Kilishi's eyes hardened further. Your father died and left nothing. Nothing, she snapped. Now everybody expects my husband to carry all of you like luggage. Zubaida felt heat rise painfully behind her eyes. Don't stand there looking shocked, Kilishi continued. Poor people like your mother should be grateful somebody is helping at all. That dirty village you came from may tolerate laziness, but not here. You will help the maids. You will clean when necessary. And don't ever think you are equal to my children. Zubaida swallowed hard. Her chest hurt, but Kilishi was not finished. The only reason Kabir feels pity for you people is because your father used to drive that useless bus around like a servant. That one broke something inside her because nobody insulted her father in front of her before. Nobody. Tears burned her eyes instantly, but she fought desperately not to cry. Kilishi noticed. Good, she said coldly. At least you understand quickly. Then suddenly footsteps echoed downstairs. A car door slammed outside. Kabir had returned. And like magic, Hajia Kilishi transformed again. The smile returned instantly. Her voice softened. She even adjusted Zubaida's hijab gently. There now, she said sweetly. You will settle in beautifully here. The door opened moments later. Kabir entered smiling. There you both are. Kilishi laughed softly. I was just encouraging her. She misses home. Kabir looked touched. I knew bringing her here was the right decision. Kilishi placed a gentle hand on Zubaida's shoulder. She is like my own daughter. That night, Zubaida cried silently into her pillow, long after everybody slept. And for the first time since losing her father, she truly understood what fear felt like. Days later, she overheard the conversation that changed everything again. It happened one afternoon while she arranged folded clothes outside the upstairs family lounge. The door to Kabir's private sitting room was slightly open. Inside, Kabir was discussing schools. "I think we should register Zubaida at Royal Crest Academy with the others," he said thoughtfully. "The school is excellent." Zubaida's heart lifted immediately. It was the same expensive school her cousins attended. But Kilishi responded carefully, softly, convincingly, exactly the way her mother once feared she would. "Honestly," Kilishi began gently, "I was thinking maybe we should allow her adjust gradually first." Kabir frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "She is from a completely different environment," Kilishi explained calmly. "Village schools and Abuja schools are not the same. Those children that have been exposed to computers, advanced English, all sorts of things since childhood are not the same with Zubaida." Kabir became quiet. Kilishi continued sweetly, "I'm only worried she may feel intimidated there. She just lost her father. She already feels out of place. If she struggles academically beside our children, it may damage her confidence." Everything sounded reasonable, kind, even compassionate, and that frightened Zubaida most because the woman sounded sincere. Kabir sighed slowly. "That is true." Kilishi lowered her voice. "There's another private school nearby, smaller, simpler. It will help her transition first before bigger things later." A long silence followed. Then finally Kabir nodded. "Maybe you are right." Outside the door, Zubaida stood completely still. Her fingers tightened around the folded clothes in her hands. Something deep inside her already understood the truth. This was only the beginning. Zubaida continued to endure the cruelty of Hajia Kilishi and her children, quietly. Very quickly, she understood that she was living two completely different lives inside the same house. One life existed when Alhaji Kabir was around. The other began the moment he left. And he was away a lot. Sometimes for political meetings, sometimes for trips outside Abuja, sometimes for entire weekends. Whenever he was home, the house became softer somehow. Voices lowered, Kilishi smiled more, the children behaved properly. But once his car disappeared through the gates, the tension returned almost immediately. So Zubaida learned quickly: stay quiet, stay invisible, and avoid trouble. Most days, she remained inside the small room she had been given near the back staircase. She only came out for school, chores, or meals, because Hajia Kilishi hated seeing her idle. "If you have time to sit," she will say coldly, "then you have time to walk." Eventually, Zubaida started spending most of her free time in the kitchen with the family cook, Muhammadu. He was an old man from Kano with a graying beard, weakness, and endless stories. Unlike everybody else in the house, Muhammadu never treated her like a burden. Sometimes he simply allowed her sit quietly near the kitchen counter while he cooked, and Zubaida loved watching him cook. Back in Mani, cooking meant tuwo, soups, rice, kose, or occasional jollof during celebration. But Muhammadu cooked things Zubaida had never ever imagined before. Creamy stir-fried vegetables sizzling loudly inside large pans. Golden croissant that filled the kitchen with the smell of butter. Small meat pies arranged perfectly on trays. Soft cakes covered with smooth cream. Sometimes he made pasta with white sauce that looked strange but tasted rich and comforting. Other times he prepared grilled chicken with herbs that made the entire kitchen smell different from normal Nigerian food. Zubaida watched everything carefully. "How did you learn all this?" she once asked him in amazement. Muhammadu laughed proudly. Lagos. Then the stories would begin. In his youth, Muhammadu had worked for a Lebanese family in Victoria Island. According to him, they changed his entire understanding of cooking. These people could eat bread morning, afternoon, and night, he once complained dramatically while kneading dough. Zubaida laughed. Another time, he told her about cooking for white engineers during an oil company event decades earlier. One Oyibo man nearly cried because pepper entered his nose, Muhammadu said, shaking his head. After one spoon of stew, he started sweating like somebody digging a well. Sometimes he spoke about old Lagos in ways that fascinated Zubaida. The traffic, the tall buildings, the beaches, the expensive hotels where he once cooked for diplomats and businessmen. You see this cake, he said one evening while spreading cream carefully across a sponge cake. I first learned it in Ikoyi before your aunt was even married. For the first time since arriving Abuja, Zubaida found small moments of peace inside the kitchen. Nobody mocked her accent. Nobody laughed at her clothes. And slowly, while pretending only to help Muhammadu pass ingredients or watch vegetables, Zubaida began learning. One afternoon, Hajia Kilishi hosted two of her close friends for lunch. The women sat in the downstairs sitting room, laughing loudly, while Muhammadu moved in and out serving food. Zubaida helped quietly from the kitchen. She recognized one of the visitors immediately, Hajia Zulay. Unlike the other women who visited the house, Hajia Zulay had always been kind to her. She greeted servants properly, spoke gently, and once even thanked Zubaida for serving her tea. That alone made her water had stopped. Hajia Zulay sounded serious. You are being cruel to this girl, she said quietly. A long silence followed. Then, why take her away from her mother if you never wanted her here? Zubaida froze. For a moment, nobody answered. Then Hajia Kilishi laughed softly. My friend, she said calmly, sometimes you're not smart. Zubaida's fingers tightened around the tray. Kilishi continued casually, almost lazily. I know my husband very well. He loved his brother too much. If I allowed it, one day he would carry the entire family into this house. The women were quiet. So I asked for one child first, Kilishi continued. And honestly, I chose Zubaida because she is quiet. Too quiet to complain properly. A small laugh followed. With time, I will frustrate her enough to live on her own. Zubaida stopped breathing. That way, Kilishi said smoothly, my husband will never think of bringing the rest of those dirty village children here. For a second, the entire world around Zubaida felt distant. The tray suddenly felt heavy in her arms. Now she understood, truly understood. This had never been kindness, never love. She had simply been chosen, used like a shield against the rest of her family. Zubaida remained with the family for the next 18 months. And slowly, she learned how to survive inside the house. Her world became very small. School, her room, the kitchen, Saudat, Muhammadu. Those were the only places where she felt safe. She studied Hajia Kilishi carefully over time and learned how to avoid trouble before it even started. She learned which moods meant danger, which silence meant anger, which tone meant she should disappear immediately. So she stayed out of the woman's way as much as possible. Her school life, however, became something else entirely. At first, it nearly broke her confidence. Back in Mani, Zubaida had been the best student in her class. Teachers praised her constantly. People said she was gifted. But Abuja humbled her quickly. After her first term in the school, she was almost last in the class despite studying harder than anybody else. The mathematics looked different. The English was faster. The science classes felt impossible sometimes. What they covered in 1 week in Abuja felt like an entire term back in Mani. For the first time in her life, Zubaida started wondering quietly if Hajia Kilishi had been right after all. Maybe village children truly could not compete. But Alhaji Kabir never allowed her give up. When he saw how frustrated she became, he surprised her one evening with an iPad and a small iPhone. Zubaida almost could not speak from shock. Then patiently, Kabir taught her how to use the internet properly. How to search is more important than memorizing, he told her. He showed her educational videos, online dictionaries, learning websites, past questions. Slowly something changed. Zubaida started studying late into the night inside her small room, watching lessons repeatedly until she understood them. By second term, she came third in her class. Even her teachers were shocked by the improvement. Kabir was proud, very proud. And strangely, even Hajia Kilishi reduced her cruelty for a while. Not kindness, never kindness. But the constant insults became less frequent. For the first time since arriving Abuja, Zubaida began allowing herself small dangerous thoughts. Maybe things would eventually become okay. Maybe she could survive there after all. Then Kawu Sada arrived and everything changed again. Even before he came, the tension inside the house became obvious. The servants whispered constantly. Kilishi argued with Kabir almost every night behind closed doors. And for the first time, Zubaida heard real anger in her uncle's voice. No, Kabir said sharply one evening. That man cannot stay here. But Hajia Kilishi refused to let the matter go. She cried, became cold, accused Kabir of lacking compassion. You brought your dead brother's child into this house, she said bitterly one night. But my own brother cannot stay temporarily while trying to rebuild his life. Kabir remained firm initially. Everybody knew Kawu Sada's history: armed robbery, prison, and violence. Even the servants looked frightened whenever his name came up. But Hajia Kilishi was patient, manipulative, relentless. She reminded Kabir constantly about all the sacrifices she had made for his family over the years. How many people have I tolerated? She demanded emotionally. Slowly, Kabir gave in. And one weekend, Kawu Sada finally arrived. He was tall, dark, and very handsome, just like his sister. He was heavy-bodied, with hard eyes that made people uncomfortable immediately. Even before speaking, he carried something dangerous around with him. Kabir did not allow him stay inside the main mansion. Instead, Kawu Sada was given one of the service apartments behind the house. But somehow, that did not make Zubaida feel safer. Almost immediately after Kawu Sada moved into the service apartment, the atmosphere inside the house changed. Every morning after Alhaji Kabir left for work, Kawu Sada would stroll into the main house like he owned it. He always sat in Kabir's favorite chair in the sitting room, picked up the remote, increased the television volume loudly, and started barking orders at the servants. You there! Bring me water. Why is this place hot? Can somebody put on the AC? Who cooked this tasteless food? Even the older servants seemed uncomfortable around him. Only Hajia Kilishi appeared relaxed. In fact, she spent most of her time sitting with him, laughing, gossiping, or discussing family matters in low voices. Her own children avoided him as much as possible, except Saudat. Saudat, of course, did not seem to understand that anything was wrong. Sometimes she wandered into the sitting room, talking about cartoons or school stories, while everybody else remained tense. Zubaida, however, disliked him immediately, not because of his roughness, but because of the way he looked at her. Too long, too closely. And sometimes when passing her in corridors or near the kitchen, he would accidentally brush against her in ways that made her skin crawl. At first, she tried convincing herself she was imagining it. Then Muhammadu noticed too. One afternoon, while they prepared vegetables in the kitchen, The old cook lowered his voice quietly. Be careful around that man, he warned. Zubaida looked up slowly. Muhammadu avoided her eyes. You know he has been to prison, he muttered. People learn all kinds of darkness there. After that conversation, Zubaida became more careful. She avoided being alone in rooms with him, avoided quiet corridors, avoided the service apartment completely. But Kawu Sada continued. In front of Hajia Kilishi, he insulted her constantly. Kilishi, wallahi, you are trying, he laughed one afternoon. The girl still smells like village smoke. Kilishi laughed loudly. Maybe Muhammadu should soak her inside perfume. Everybody laughed except Zubaida. But whenever he found opportunities to catch her alone, his behavior changed completely. His voice softened, his eyes lingered, and sometimes his hands stayed too long whenever passing close to her. It frightened her badly, so badly that she started wearing hijab almost constantly inside the house now, even during weekends. She did not know who to tell. Certainly not Hajia Kilishi, and Alhaji Kabir was almost never around. Then one Saturday morning, everything nearly went terribly wrong. The older children had traveled to Dubai for a school excursion. Only Saudat and Zubaida remained at home. Alhaji Kabir was away again. And for most of the morning, Kawu Sada sat with his sister in the sitting room talking quietly for hours. Zubaida stayed in the kitchen helping Muhammadu prepare lunch. At some point, Kawu Sada passed through the kitchen doorway casually. One food is ready, he said lazily. Bring mine to my room. Then he walked away. Muhammadu's face darkened slightly, but he said nothing. Later, when the food was ready, Zubaida carried the tray reluctantly toward the service apartment. To her surprise, she found Kawu Sada sitting inside the sitting room. The television was on, and the volume was soft. He smiled the moment he saw her, a wide, uncomfortable smile. As she placed the tray on the table, he softened his voice strangely. Come and sit down small. Let's talk. No, Zubaida said. I still have work in the kitchen. She immediately turned towards the door. But before she could reach it, the door shut loudly behind her. Her heart jumped violently. Kawu Sada moved toward her fast and grabbed her arm roughly. Zubaida panicked instantly and screamed. He quickly tried to silence her, speaking harshly under his breath. Then suddenly, bang, 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 somebody was pounding heavily on the door. It was Muhammadu. The old cook had followed behind because he did not trust Kawu Sada. Immediately, Kawu Sada released her. Zubaida let out another terrified scream that echoed through the apartment. She pulled the door open and ran past Muhammadu back toward the main house, shaking uncontrollably. Behind her, Kawu Sada started laughing nervously. Ha ha, wallahi, I don't even know what happened, he said quickly. Maybe the girl is afflicted with jinns. She just started screaming. Muhammadu stared at him silently for several long seconds, and without saying a word, the old man turned and walked away. The next few days became a blur for Zubaida. Nothing felt real anymore. When Hajia Kilishi first questioned her about what happened, Zubaida finally broke down and told her everything. To her shock, Hajia Kilishi slapped her immediately. Then again, and again. For the first time since arriving Abuja, the woman beat her openly and mercilessly. You wicked girl, Kilishi shouted. You want to destroy my brother's life with lies. Muhammadu tried speaking, tried defending her, but Kilishi turned on to him. You are conspiring together. That evening, trembling and crying uncontrollably, Zubaida called Haji Kabir and told him everything. Hours later, Kilishi stormed into her room and slapped her again. Liar, she hissed. But the strangest person was Kawu Sada himself. He cried loudly like a child. Actually cried, bawling and holding his head dramatically. They want to ruin my life, he kept shouting. They want to send me back to prison. The entire house descended into chaos. Alhaji Kabir cut his trip short and returned immediately. But when he arrived, everybody was crying. Kilishi crying, Kawu Sada crying, Zubaida crying. Even Muhammadu looked broken. The confusion overwhelmed him completely. Privately, Kilishi spoke to her husband for a long time behind closed doors. To my surprise, she told him emotionally, "My brother doesn't even like that girl. He's always complaining she smells like village smoke." She shook her head sadly. So why would she accuse him of such a terrible thing? Then softly she added, "I think this is a conspiracy to send him back to prison." Kabir cautioned the other staff too. One of the cleaners, Lare, admitted she had often heard Kawu Sada insult, she often heard Muhammadu and Zubaida insulting Kawu Sada. She also said she has heard Kawu Sada insulting Zubaida and calling her dirty. And honestly, she said nervously, he has never behaved badly with any of us. Slowly, the room started turning against Zubaida. Only Muhammadu continued insisting something had happened, but fewer people listened now. Even when Kabir spoke privately with Zubaida, she refused to change her story. "I am not lying, uncle," she whispered through tears. Then Hajia Zulay arrived unexpectedly. The moment she heard what had happened, her face hardened. She looked directly at Kilishi and Kabir. "What reason does this child have to lie?" she asked quietly. "There are many male workers in this house. Why accuse only him?" For a brief moment, silence filled the room, but the chaos continued. That night, long after everybody slept, Hajia Kilishi entered Zubaida's room quietly. Her face looked cold again. "If you do not go tomorrow and admit you lied," she whispered, "I will make sure your uncle stops helping your family completely." Zubaida froze. "And when that happens," Kilishi continued softly, "your mother and siblings will suffer because of you." After she left, Zubaida sat awake the entire night. And deep inside her, she understood the truth. There was no way to win this fight. Nobody will truly believe her over Kilishi's brother. And if she stayed, one day Kawu Sada will eventually succeed. So before dawn, she made her decision. The next morning, she packed her small belongings quietly. Then she went downstairs to find Alhaji Kabir. He was sitting alone in the sitting room, looking exhausted and deeply troubled. When he saw her, face swollen, his face softened immediately. Zubaida slowly knelt before him. "I am sorry for everything," she whispered. The words nearly refused to leave her mouth. Then finally, "I lied against Kawu Sada." Kabir stared at her silently. Tears rolled down. "I was jealous," she forced herself to say. "I thought maybe you would stop caring about me if you stayed here." The shame of those words nearly destroyed her. Kabir closed his eyes heavily. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then quietly, Zubaida added, "Go home." Something painful passed Kabir's face, but he nodded slowly. A few hours later, he instructed the driver to prepare for the journey back to Mani. As Zubaida carried her back to the car, Saudat ran after her, crying loudly, "You cannot go." But nobody listened. And before sunset that same day, Zubaida was already leaving Abuja behind her once again. That evening, Hajia Kilishi sacked Muhammadu. Thank you for listening to Northern Tales. See you next week for the concluding part of the story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Give us your prediction about what will happen in the next part.